Katie, this story broke while we were on the air yesterday. As soon as we saw it from our friends over at CNN, we talked about it for a good part of the broadcast. But there's some incredible reporting, including in the New York Times, filling out how we understand this tape to have been deployed by Jack Smith. Fill us in.
Yeah, so what he wants to do is he wants to explain to jurors that Donald Trump's defense, that he had a few defenses, but the top defense that he's deployed again and again is that he just declassified everything the minute that he left, as he was leaving office, so everything would have been declassified. So the idea that he's hesitating to share something because it could be too sensitive does sort of lead you to believe that he knew that there was something about this document, which was marked secret, that he couldn't, it made it impossible for him to share it. So it kind of gets to a state of mind, which is something that we very rarely get with Donald Trump. Usually we have people talking about what he may or may not think, what he may or may not want. But this is Donald Trump himself hesitating to share something because of its secretiveness or its sensitiveness. So that would be really important for the jury. Also, it breaks through another defense, which is that Donald Trump packed the boxes and had really no idea what was in them. He didn't do this. Okay, so if this was an accident and somebody else packed these boxes, at some point, at least by the summer of 2021, he'd found at least one document that he realized was very sensitive. And instead of returning it to the National Archives, he kept it.
Katie, it also, I think, reminds people what was happening in this period. He was doing a lot of interviews with a lot of journalists who were writing a lot of books. This one was an autobiography of Mark Meadows, I believe. This is the Washington Post reporting about these authors or reporters. In a section of his book, The Chief's Chief, Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, appears to describe the meeting where the recording obtained by the Justice Department was made. The boss leans back in his chair, dressed in a sport coat and a crisp white shirt that's open at the neck. Ooh. He looks at least 20 pounds lighter than when he was in office, Meadows' book says. The president recalls a 4-page report typed up by Mark Milley himself that contains the general's own plan to attack Iran, deploying massive numbers of troops, something he urged President Trump to do more than once during his presidency. Trump denied those requests every time. Just give us sort of the contemporaneous context for what was going on between Trump and Milley, a real, at least in Trump's head, grudge match between the two men.
Yeah, so Trump was often upset with Milley. He felt that he wasn't doing the things that he wanted to do, that he wasn't allowing Trump to do things that Trump would have liked to do. And in this instance, we see Mark Meadows basically spinning this idea that Milley himself had come up with a plan to attack Iran and that Donald Trump had somehow held him back and didn't want him to do it. You know, we have reporting and other outlets have reported that, in fact, it was not unusual for Milley and others in his position to write reports with a variety of scenarios that show potential U.S. responses to countries like Iran. And so this may be being spun by somebody like Meadows and other former Trump officials to make it seem like Trump had been this extremely reasonable person. But in fact, it seems like this is just the sort of document that the Pentagon would prepare so that the commander-in-chief would understand all available options.
We've seen a lot of golf shots, Rick Stengel, of Trump, and at least in those images on the golf course, he looks 20 pounds lighter. Doesn't ring through with much credibility. And getting, you know, I'm sympathetic to that. But in terms of what Katie's reporting, I mean, it is pure, unadulterated spin.
Yes, you know, listening to that and having written a few books and helped other people write books, the passage that's quoted, obviously, Mark Meadows wasn't there. So that was the ghostwriters or the people who were supposedly doing interviews for the book were saying that. So he's in the book. He's obviously ingratiating himself with Trump. The idea of Mark Meadows even having an autobiography is kind of a scandal just on its own. But to go to the broader point, though, I mean, this is more than a smoking gun. These are the bullets, right? This is a violation of the Espionage Act, which says you're not allowed to keep these papers that talk to national defense. And remember, the Espionage Act is from 1919. It's before the classification era of Truman. So even this idea of whether he can or can't classify them, in a way, are irrelevant to the prosecution charges.
It brings us to the potential criminal exposure that, you know, Harry, you do a very good job of putting our conversations in the correct chronological order. We talk about things when they become public, when journalists like Katie or in yesterday's instance, CNN, break the stories. But this clearly is something that Jack Smith has known about since his grand jury was convened and already presented to it.
That's right. It couldn't be later than the 5th of May, which is the last time they met. It was probably through the testimony of Margot Martin, Trump's person, who was the loyal aide taping everything. But Katie really nails it, I'd say, Nicole, because what this is, I think smoking gun is not overstated. In every case, no matter how big, there's sort of a small binder of 20 hot docs or so. And this one really is a strong candidate for exactly the reason Katie said. Everything's been nailed up for, I think, a long time. And the only remaining question, even that I don't think is much of a question, is about state of mind. And yes, for Trump, whatever that paper is, it looks like Meadows is misdescribing it. Some have said maybe he's just faking it. It doesn't matter. The words coming out of his mouth acknowledge, one, he's kept classified documents, and two, even more importantly, there are rules about what he can do with them. So it completely puts the lie to the malarkey he's said again and again and again, that he automatically declassifies them and then can do whatever he wants with them.
Someone pointed out to me that the danger in this is sort of threefold. One, it proves that he knew there was a declassification process. And I think some earlier reporting about NARA explaining it to him also got at this. But this is a tape of him in his own words. We've already seen how reactive a jury in the E. Jean Carroll case was to him in his own words copying to something. In this case, it's to knowing there is a process for declassification. The second is he acknowledges that everything he'd taken hadn't been declassified by thinking it or otherwise, because he's waving around a piece of paper, or at least pretending to, we don't know, that he says is declassified. And this person also said it's an intent to disseminate. I want to show it to you, but I can't. We don't know that he didn't later on in the day. Tell me how those three things sort of bolster Trump's criminal exposure.
Yeah, boom, boom, and boom. You could have taken your 45 seconds and put them in a government rebuttal argument. So first, it blows out of the water his putative state of mind defenses, which, by the way, I've been saying again and again, it's time to think about this as it'll come to a jury. It's not clear how, if you take it as axiomatic as I do, that he won't testify, how he's even going to present his forcocked ideas is unclear. But this is strong evidence that, of course, he knew, and of course he knew he couldn't do things with them. And then as to the Espionage Act, or a conspiracy, which doesn't require actual consummation, having him brandish it like this and obviously be eager to show it in conjunction with other testimony, which Katie's team has reported that he would be under the habit of showing it to people, though that grounds a whole separate offense under 793 Espionage Act if Smith wants to bring it.
So, Harry, you are an obstruction hawk, and you do not spend as much time on this program talking about what's publicly facing and potentially incriminating on the other side of this, sort of prong one. You've now used the word Espionage Act twice. Is this a piece of evidence that makes you think or sort of recalibrate your thinking that maybe Jack is pursuing both tracks aggressively?
First three tracks, because there's also the track of the unlawful taking, which, among other things, is more likely to be in D.C. or EDVA, where he wants venue. Short answer is yes, although I'm still not totally on the other side. I think the evidence is there, and it's going to be a matter of prosecutorial judgment for him and Garland. Really him. Garland will defer as to whether or not he wants to potentially complicate the case and make the state of mind so central when he's got the goods on him on the other things. So it could be on its own something that enhances obstruction, or yes, it could be freestanding Espionage Act. Others have said it's dead bang that it will. My hesitation is because I can imagine a seasoned prosecutor like Smith wanting to simplify, not complicate at this late juncture.